So welcome to this celebration of the career of our friend, colleague, and teacher, Madhav Deshpande. I think we were looking forward to a very interesting and inspiring afternoon. I'm going to dispense with the ritual reading of the CV, but I'd like to begin with some basic biography. Madhav was born in Pune in 1946, attending Bharat Elementary School, the New English School, the renowned Fergusson College, and the University of Pune. He was a Sanskrit prodigy. At age 16, he won the Jagannath Shankar Sheth Sanskrit Scholarship for the best score on the secondary school Sanskrit exam for the entire state of Maharashtra. That same year, he won the Acharya Sanskrit Prize and the Patkar Sanskrit Scholarship. He would win 10 more Sanskrit prizes and scholarships over the next 4 years. In 1968, he sailed for America on the good ship Jaladuta, a merchant vessel. He spent the voyage editing a Pali commentary in Burmese script, which he had never studied before, on the questions of King Milinda. He enrolled at the University of Pennsylvania, where he encountered American urban life for the first time. There are many stories from those days. He completed his PhD in 1972, and that same year came to Ann Arbor as a visiting assistant professor of Sanskrit in the Department of Linguistics. Through a fortuitous set of karmic circumstances, which almost did not come together, he's remained with us for the past 45 years. And so I will not read from Madhav's 39-page CV, but I would like to tell you that his publications are organized as follows. They begin with articles in Marathi, followed by Marathi poems, articles in Hindi, articles in Sanskrit, creative writing in Sanskrit, 2 one-act plays, Sanskrit poems, and finally, research publications in English, of which there are 173 items. Many of these are of a somewhat technical nature. We all remember, for example, from 2012, underived nominals as a derivationally productive category in Panini, of course. As interesting as this would be to many of us, it is the technical nature of much of Madhav's work that has led us to dispense with the standard reading of papers that constitute so many retirement events. For what Madhav is known for, as much as his prodigious scholarship, is his generosity, his integrity, and his kindness. His generosity, not only for serving on 45 dissertation committees over the years, but in always being ready to provide answers to all manner of ignorant questions from his colleagues, many of those coming from me, both here in Ann Arbor and around the world. His integrity in all elements of his professional and personal life, evident, for example, in his resistance to the Hindutva distortions of the glorious tradition that he knows so well. As so many others did, he could have added his voice to the shrill calls for purity and reap great financial reward and acclaim. Instead, he spoke eloquently to defend the principles of scholarship to which he has devoted his life. So, instead of papers, we will have tribute from his colleagues and his students. We've organized this in chronological order, with 2 of Madhav's oldest colleagues speaking first, followed by 3 of his former students, followed by a current student. We're grateful to all of them, 2 of whom flew here from abroad to honor Madhav today. Madhav and Shubhangi will then say a few words. I know that many members of the audience would like to offer their own congratulations. We'll have an opportunity to do that at the reception that will follow, which will be in the other reception room at the other end of Rackham once we finish up. So over the course of the afternoon, we'll learn much about a brilliant career, but also about the venerable tradition of South Asian studies at Michigan as we celebrate our bicentennial. So let me now introduce our first speaker. This is Professor Thomas Troutman, Professor Emeritus. Tom was here before Madhav arrived, joining the faculty in 1968 after receiving his PhD at SOAS with the famous A.L. Basham. Tom is a renowned scholar in both anthropology and history, doing early work in kinship, which evolved into work on caste, which evolved into work on the Aryan question in British India, and he's the inspiration to all of us who have retired or near retirement, because he's been a very productive scholar in his retirement years, having published the wonderful book, Elephants and Kings, which I recommend to all of you. So, Tom, welcome.
Thank you very much. Friends, I've been, in preparation for this afternoon, I've been reading and rereading Madhav's works, reading some of it for the first time, and trying to figure out the logic of his scholarly life. And I'd like to present the results of my researches to you, so that you will be relieved of the obligation of reading through that long bibliography to which Don alluded. Now, this is the Commanding Heights. This is Madhav's big book, and it really is big. As you see, it's 800 pages. It weighs 3, 4, 5 pounds, I would say, and it has a completely obscure title, which is Shaunakya Chaturadhyayaka. Chaturadhyayaka is a book in 4 chapters, or in fact, it doesn't even have the word book in it. It's the 4-chapter thing, and Shaunaka indicates that it's the property of a particular Vedic school, right? And it is the critical edition of a Sanskrit text proceeding from that school. If I told you a better title for this book would be Atharva Veda Pratishakya, which you would understand immediately. It is the phonological analysis of the Atharva Veda. Okay, and Pratishakya is one branch of the various parts of India's greatest, earliest intellectual achievement, which is the linguistic study of Sanskrit itself, which is really the commanding heights of ancient Indian history and culture and Indology in general, the hardest part and the most important part. The part which gave to the world a really precociously early development and scientific exactitude that became very important in India and in the world generally. Not only did, I should say now that this book was first published, that is this text was written near about or before the time of Panini, which Madhav puts at 500 BC, plus or minus we'll just assume on any date so far back. So in other words, the text he's editing critically in this book is at least 2,500 years old. It's very, very old and very precious for that reason. So precious that Whitney, who published this text first in 1862, did so on the basis of a single manuscript known to him in Berlin, which he says is very defective. But it was such a rare text, he thought even attempting to publish a defective manuscript was better than nothing, because he didn't expect any others to appear. But others did appear. Other manuscripts are found in Whitney's lifetime, and later other editions appeared. Madhav himself found several manuscripts of this text, and by the time he wrote, and he did this through his persistence, this wasn't an accident. He didn't stumble on these things like stones in a path. He was looking for these things because his teachers had inclined him toward the Shaunakya Atharva Veda and its phonology. And so over the years, he found other manuscripts, and made a critical edition by comparing all of them and constructing a text which we can rely on. Hence, much of the book is filled with the Sanskrit text with long amounts of Nagari and footnotes in English and mentions of the manuscript variants, lots of indexical material, lots of prefatory discussion. Now, this book was made by Madhav in a very material way as well. I don't mean he actually made the paper or he actually printed it, but pretty close. He devised, being a computer wizard, he devised fonts for this book. He devised two fonts, one in Nagari and one in Roman diacritics. And he says, these fonts are named after my daughters. The Nagari font is titled Madhushri, and the Roman diacritics font is called Manjushri. So this really gives the man. The man is in the book. The scholar of this very, very difficult and very valuable tradition, the father, proud father, the husband, the colleague, the teacher. It's a wonderful, wonderful book, if only we could understand it. Now, actually, we can understand a bit of it because he introduces it to us in the preface, and we can get a lot out of this. Madhav has a very good capacity of making the difficulties of this topic of his accessible to others, and I especially appreciate his writings for encyclopedia articles or general reader articles in this most important of ancient Indian scientific areas, that is the area of grammar of Panini and his successors, and of Pratishakya, which the analysis of the alphabet, the sounds of Sanskrit, which is even older, and are such important treasures of world intellectual history. So what brought him to the making of this magnificent book? I won't go through the biography, but I just wanted to quote a couple things he wrote about his teachers in India. Let's see, where did I put this? It was a very amusing word picture of Dandekar, who pointed him towards the Atharva Veda. R.N. Dandekar, of him he says this: Dandekar was a wonderful teacher, careful, methodical, stern at the same time. He would enter the class on time and would close the door behind him. No latecomers allowed in his class, and this is the sentence I like. The only time I remember there was some laughter in the class was when some little child was standing outside one of the windows and making faces at us. And he goes on to describe how Dandekar introduced the class to the world of scholarship, including European scholarship on India, and how he critiqued it and indicated what he agreed with and what he didn't, coming up with his final opinion, and conveying to students, at least quite explicitly, illustrating to students how every opinion needs to be examined and considered, and one must make up one's own mind, even though it's pretty clear from his narrative that those who lived in a close radius to Dandekar generally agreed with him. His other great teacher, of whom he writes very fondly, is S.T. Joshi, a different kind of a person, very much a pundit, who was very poor, who lived on the benefactions of pious Brahmin householders of Pune, who would feed students as a meritorious act, and who, at a very early age, acquired a formidable reputation. His own father was a classmate of S.T. Joshi. he says this: initially, my father was unaware of the fact that S.T. Joshi was already an accomplished scholar and teacher. To him, he was just a close friend. One day, Joshi took him to Pune Sanskrit College. My father mentioned that there was said to be a very learned teacher called Panditji at that college, and that he would very much like to meet him. After some time, Joshi revealed the fact that he was Panditji. And this is a very young college-age man. So we see the warmth that Madhav feels for S.T. Joshi and his memory, and much of his writings follow the process through which both his teachers passed, from, as he says, from pundit to professor, the kind of intellectual and institutional and professional arc of transition that they made. This is a very great interest to him, as is the relation between Western Indology and Indian Indology, and the differing frames of reference that they call into being. And I feel for myself that this especially issues in his interest in the idea of eternal Sanskrit as a language without change, a language without history, which underwrites ancient conceptions, especially through the Mimamsa school, but various branches of linguistic study. And I think it's the case that in the West, at the time Western Indology was forming, the great expansion or explosion, really, of historical consciousness that absorbed not only the writing of ancient history, but everything in the world, including Darwin's biology and the historically minded cosmologies that were emerging in the 19th century. Really, so today on our campus, there is no branch of the campus that isn't sort of suffused by the idea of the importance of process through time and of getting that straight in whatever discipline we are. And Madhav is both within that process, but also a commentator on it. I think that's kind of the intellectual side of this transition from pundit to professor that he talks about, and that he and his teachers, his own father, his community embody. Because Madhav's dealing with this very formidable and difficult tradition of linguistic analysis of Vedic times and onwards is so hard to follow, and because he makes it so easy to understand, at least in the broad outlines, I was inspired to go way beyond my own competence, relying on him, and to make an argument that the understanding of this intellectual tradition of linguistic analysis is important not just for the study of understanding, illumination of India's past, but it was of world importance, even though we don't even know the word pratishakya. It's alive in our world today, our international world today. I'll just give three sort of ways in which that is so. One is that the phonological analysis of pratishakya undergirds or is concretized in the alphabetical order of Indian scripts based on the Brahmi script of ancient times, which was surely guided by the pratishakya tradition. So if you get a Hindi cell phone today, you have a keypad that says ABCD, but if you want to send a text message in Nagari, in Hindi, you can press a button and turn it into a keypad that says and so forth. This rational alphabetical order that undergirds it sort of is the Pratishakya tradition put in a concrete form and used every day, not only in India, in many of its scripts, not all of them, but most of its scripts, many of the scripts of Southeast East Asia, all the way to the Philippines, and notable scripts of Central Asia as well, including Tibetan and Mongolian. So here's a way in which this Pratishakya tradition is alive today in the mouths of and in the pens of people in a very large part of Asia. Secondly, working with Bill Baxter, I've come to know a little about the phonetic analysis of Chinese. The Chinese, of course, were exposed to Indian linguistic analysis through Buddhist monks who worked in Sanskrit, but the Chinese had no need of a script. They had a very fine one of their own. Thank you very much. But they did make use of this phonological analysis of the Indian scripts to devise their own ways of recovering the sounds of ancient Chinese classic poetry, which used to rhyme and no longer does. And reconstructing those early sounds was the task that Chinese philology set itself and consumed Indian linguistic analysis as a means for their own cultural project. And people like Bill Baxter today keep feeding off of the results of that, those rhyming dictionaries and rhyme books of ancient Chinese that are influenced by this Indian analysis. Finally, the Europeans made use of this analysis in devising their own international phonetic alphabet and creating a comparative philology that was historical in character, which was different from the Indian form, which treated Sanskrit not as an eternal changeless language, but as a normal historical language like any other in their analysis, and created sort of the international standard of scientific linguistics that prevails today. I might just mention, for those of you who are old enough to have seen the movie My Fair Lady, that Henry Higgins, the professor, is a phonetician named after a real phonetician, Henry Sweet, who studied Sanskrit in England and was, well, I'll leave it at that. My case is big. So as the sun sinks into California, we understand with great sadness, but we understand the logic of following the sun to where his and Shubhangi's dear daughters live and their grandchildren live. Makes a lot of sense. It reminds me of that story of some German chronicler of the Middle Ages who said of Friedrich Barbarossa that when he crossed the Alps and descended into Italy, he brought peace and happiness to the Italians as he denied them by his absence to the Germans. So we know Madhav will be happy, even though we are sad. And I'm happy to know that he'll have an office in Stanford, thanks to his friend Paul Kiparsky, whose book, Panini is a Variationist, Madhav reviewed years ago. In this book, he says, this is a landmark publication in the field of Sanskrit grammar, significant, etc. Even the harshest critics of his thesis must agree this is one of the most important books written about Panini for a long time. Now, you might think they agree about everything from that language, but the review goes on to put in very small type. Suddenly, the type size gets very small, and there follows 2 pages of disagreements with Kiparsky. So they at least will have lots to talk about. I just treasure Madhav so much. The sweetness at the heart of all this learning, the kindness, the generosity to colleagues, to students, is something I'll miss now that he's about to depart. I feel I haven't taken advantage of him, of these qualities as much as I should have. But there is always email, and he's very good in the electronic department. So he will be reachable, and it won't be a complete parting, but I'm certainly grateful for the many years we've had together, and look forward to keeping in touch. Thank you very much.
So I hold in my hand a book. In addition to inviting people to come from around the world to speak about Madhav, I also wrote to many of the leading Sanskrit scholars and asked them to send comments, and many of them did. So in between our speakers, I'm going to read a comment from someone, and Madhav has to guess who it's from. Okay, okay. Although it makes me a bit sad to think that Madhav Rao will be retiring from Michigan, filling me with mournful reflections about the theme of Kala Kalayati Prajaha, time impels all creatures, I take great comfort in the fact that he will be shifting to the Bay Area this coming summer. Now we will be able to meet more frequently to bring him and his vast learning to so many fields of Indology into our small circle of South Asia scholars. Madhav and I go way back, sharing so many colleagues and memories of Sanskrit studies in Pune, and occasionally getting together to talk, share ideas, and sometimes chant a few favorite Sanskrit verses. Madhav's breadth of knowledge in so many fields of Indological and Shastric knowledge, including but well beyond his own special area of interest in Vyakarana, is truly impressive, if not to say astonishing. Equally striking is his generosity in sharing his learning broadly across various print and electronic media. This last point brings up one further particularly admirable quality that Madhav exemplifies: his level-headedness and rationality in the midst of an increasingly partisan and xenophobic trend in Sanskrit studies. In the wake of the ongoing agitation on the part of some Indian, largely non-Indologist academics, spearheaded by the author of The Battle for Sanskrit in the service of so-called Swadeshi Indology, Madhav remains a calm, learned, and nonpartisan voice, able to engage constructively with all sides. He is, in fact, one of the very few who can participate easily, productively, and without controversy on both the Indology and the Bharatiya Vidva Parishat listservs without arousing antagonism on either. I know that you die-hard Wolverines will miss Madhav's cheerful and collegial presence, but know that he will soon feel at home with our motley assemblage of Bear and Cardinal. Congratulations, Madhav Rao, on a stellar career.
Goldman?
Correct. Okay, right, yeah. So. So next, I'd like to introduce another former colleague of Madhav. This is the person who founded our illustrious Buddhist Studies program, arriving at U of M in 1973, 1 year after Madhav. This is Professor Luis Gomez, Professor Emeritus, Collegiate Professor Emeritus, Thurnau Professor Emeritus. He and Madhav did something extraordinary in the early 70s. The two of them started a Buddhist Studies program that is unheard of today. And they attracted some incredible students, two of whom are here today, whom you'll meet in a moment. They also include Robert Scharf, Griffith Folk, Reiko Onuma, Jonathan Silk, all of whom sent their good wishes to their teacher. Luis was department chair in ALC for many years, the person who really is responsible for so many things at our university, and I'm particularly grateful to him for hiring me long ago. Luis has come all the way from Mexico City to honor his friend, and so I'd like to welcome him to the podium.
Wow, Madhav, 45 years? You know, he came to
Michigan a year before I did, and now he's retiring 10 years after I did. So that doesn't speak about my wanting to leave. It speaks about his dedication, how much he loves teaching and the academy. And I know he already told me today, so it's not that I'm in any way have some psychic powers, but I know that he has some ambiguity about this, so I will talk a little bit about why you don't have to feel that kind of ambiguity. But anyway, this long stint that he has been working here is proof of stamina, fortitude, but also of dedication. This kind of event is a celebration of the past and the past achievements, and we have already heard a lot about it. But it is also a reflection on the future, and I'll say a few things at the end about that. Let me briefly speak of my years of knowing Madhav and working with him, which is really essentially both our careers, except after I left, then he has another extra 10 years that I cannot say anything about because I don't know what happened then. But, but our careers were tied together from the beginning, and I still remember the first time that I visited his house, and the girls had just been born, right? Madhushri and Manjushri. So for me, it's almost like our careers and the two girls are go like parallel, right? Developing, and they become doctors and engineers or whatever. And we just, hang on there, especially Madhav hangs on there. Also, I remember one of my first experiences hearing Shubhangi sing. Remember, that was kind of also standard fare. But above all, I think what made our bond so important, Don has already mentioned the things that we created, but also the battles we had to fight. And I won't go into that. I've actually forgotten the names of some of these deans. Fortunately, because then I don't have to retrieve them from my mind. But trying to convince the university that Sanskrit is an important discipline, well, I'm sure it's still a problem, right? But in those days, it was impossible to get them to understand the importance of that. Actually, trying to convince them that South Asia was important, let alone Sanskrit or Southeast Asia, right, was quite a battle. And we both went through the great transition from FEL to ALC, which I don't think we have any FEL people left, but they really resented it, right? It says, look, FEL, it's music. ALK, who wants to say ALK, right? And they were especially bothered by the fact that the alphabetical order of the disciplines changed radically. So it was no longer Chinese, Japanese, but it was Asian studies, Buddhist studies, Chinese. And they didn't like that at all. Okay. So those were difficult times. And unfortunately, or not unfortunately, because we should all do that, I kind of clean my hard disk periodically. So everything before 1990s, it's been completely erased. But about 5 months before I was invited, I did another cleaning, which brought me to about 1996. And I don't have the file, but I remember now. A reference letter, and I won't say to whom because it's a reference letter, and I don't know what the statute of limitations is on reference letters. But I do remember, because it struck me that the letter started talking about Madhav's contribution to the department and to the university, and pointing out something that has already been pointed out, and that is how soft-spoken and self-effacing Madhav can be, so that people then think, well, he's into some exotic, that was the word used in those days, the exotic languages. And wow, it's totally irrelevant. Trying to sell Sanskrit when you are kind of soft-spoken is very hard. And I actually tried to praise it and say, look, it's there, it's just you don't understand, right, what he's doing. And this vast field of, in several languages he has published, right? I also can think of all the students that we shared and those that we did not share. I think we have here at least 1, 2 of those students that we share. There are many others, some we have forgotten. We were actually reminiscing a while ago about those other students. Since the very first day that I came here, I had one of your students in my classes. But anyway, Sandy, Pat, and more recently, Charles Goodman, who is a philosopher, whose Sanskrit is pretty good, actually, and he worked with Madhav, and David Fjordalis, who was in Buddhist studies. So I think in some ways that letter summarizes the way I see Madhav as kind of, well, he's into his work. I mean, why should he be try to defend Sanskrit or Pratishakyas or anything like that, right? But also I started thinking about, and those I saved, by the way, about all the listserv, the Indology listserv messages that I would get from Madhav. Those I saved because they're precious. They're gems, I have lots of them, and the range of his scholarship is really impressive. And the same is true about his publications, and less obscure ones that actually had a strong impact on me are the sociolinguistic attitude in India, which I think is a really very valuable book. And there's one that goes on the obscurity side, but I've used it recently because I've been teaching a lot of Sanskrit in Mexico, The Meaning of Nouns. And it sounds like, well, it's the meaning of nouns. Semantic theory in classical medieval India. And especially valuable because most books say there is no semantic theory, and this is the book to prove them wrong, right? And recently I've used that one. And of course, the Samskrita Subodhini, which I think has great examples. And while thinking about that, I thought about something that Tom Trauman mentioned, and that is the fonts. Because I remember actually how he was ahead of me. I'm not going to pretend that I was. But we both got into the computer thing when it came out, the moment it came out. And I remember there was someone from Pune, but I can't remember who it was, who came to my house, and we were explaining to this person that the computer used BASIC, and he said, but does it have Sanskrit, right? Remember that? I don't remember who it was. But anyway, Madhav and I were very much into that, but he was ahead of me, and he created fonts, and also, as Tom mentioned, diacritic fonts, okay? Now, that's all past. Now, the future, Madhav. Okay? I wish you many years of rediscovery, which is essentially what is coming now, okay? No need to think that everything has come to an end. As we get older, older, the past sort of extends into infinity, into the, Pleistocene or something like that. And the future is like this, right? That's a mistake. That's what you have to avoid. So let the past rest and think of every day as a new life. And you'll see you already have started. I know that you spoke to Paul Harrison, Kiparsky, and so forth. So I'm sure you will have plenty of chances to do that. I have been 10 years teaching. I haven't stopped. And I've been sick, and it's a pleasure to have students visit me at the hospital and talk about his dissertation, right? So there's something coming after I leave this stinking hospital. So there's always something out there. So, it will come with time. And I'm sure Madhav will find similar opportunities, lots of them, to prosper out in California. So all I have to say is Godspeed. Okay? The future is ahead of you. Okay?
Thank you, Luis. Let's see. Where shall I begin? In my experience spanning over 40 years, Madhav Deshpande is the only Paninian scholar who can speak in a language that the rest of us can understand. Whenever, and it is often, I've had an issue relating to the technicalities of Sanskrit grammar, the first person I wrote to was Madhav. I checked my outbox, and it is littered with messages to Madhav with the subject heading, query. Another feature of Madhav's scholarship is his ability to relate grammatical literature to the lived historical realities of ancient India. His work on Shishta is a good example. It is due to Madhav's scholarship that I began to take Patanjali seriously as a historical source, and several of my recent works bear his stamp, whether I've had the presence of mind to acknowledge this openly or not. The world of Sanskrit scholarship owes Madhav a deep debt of gratitude, and all of us hope that retirement will only mean that he will have more time to devote to his scholarly endeavors. Correct. Patrick Olivelle from Austin. Yeah. So now we turn to the former students, and the first of those is Sandy Huntington. So Sandy, I believe, was the first Buddhist studies student in the program. Is that correct, Luis?
Yeah, I think so. No, was first graduate.
First graduate student.
You were the first one because Griff had applied, but he wasn't here. He came first.
Okay. And Sandy brought with him other Dharma bums that he'd met in India that turned out to be great scholars. He did his dissertation on the mysterious Akutobhya, this commentary on the Garjana, wrote an entire book on the 6th chapter of Chandrakirti's Madhyamakavatara before you even finished your dissertation. There's a cliche that all academics are working on a novel. We all kind of roll our eyes when we hear that. Sandy actually wrote one. It was published a couple years ago called Maya and has received all sorts of fabulous reviews. I recommend it highly. So Sandy, welcome back to Ann Arbor.
Excuse me. What an honor it is to be here. And what an unmitigated pleasure to have this opportunity to express my gratitude to Madhav Deshpande. I am deeply grateful, for Madhav was not only my first Sanskrit teacher, the man who instilled in me a love of the language that I've carried with me all these years. He also rescued me 3 times at 3 critical junctures in my life when, were it not for him, events would likely have transpired quite differently. If not for Madhav, I may well never have finished my PhD. You don't necessarily know this. And even if I had finished, I might never have pursued a career in academics. This is not hyperbole. It is, however, a story. And I know it's customary at events like this, in my experience at least, to speak more or less extemporaneously. But there are details about my story that I want to get right. So I've written it out as I remember it, and I'd like to read. Madhav and I first crossed paths a long time ago, in a world that feels, to me at least, unimaginably remote. It was perhaps 1973 or perhaps 1974, I believe. I was 24 years old and had been married for a year at that time. I and my wife were fresh back from Greece, where I'd been teaching English at a privately owned language school in the small village of Itaea on the coast of Corinth. My wife and I had returned from Greece, flat broke. For 6 months, I worked as a chauffeur in Manhattan before moving to Ann Arbor with the intention of beginning graduate school. And my wife and I were living at that time in a single rented room where we cooked our meals on a hot plate and shared a common toilet and shower down the hall. I was reading, like lots of people at the time, Joseph Campbell, D.T. Suzuki, and Alan Watts, and one other book that I remember very distinctly, Heinrich Zimmer's Art of Indian Asia. I was mesmerized by the glossy black and white photos of exotic temples and elaborately carved statues of dancing gods and goddesses who somehow appeared to me at once both animated and tranquil. I was already filled with dreams of India, although I'd never been there. When I enrolled as a graduate student at Michigan, it was to pursue an MA in art history. I wanted to study with Walter Spink, who at that time had achieved wide recognition for his expertise on the caves at Ajanta. And it was in this context that I signed up for first-year Sanskrit. I don't recall our first meeting, but I vividly remember Madhav's office on the ground floor of the Frieze building. To get there, you walk through the entrance, for those of you who remember it or who don't. You walk through the entrance on East Washington and down the polished linoleum hallway, passing the linguistics office and the lounge, the offices of Pete Becker, of John Catford, and Peter Hook, all the way down to the last office on the right. Madhav's office was small and crammed with old books, every one of which I wanted to read. I perhaps didn't know about some of the things that What really captivated me, though, was the smell, a faint but distinct aroma that emanated from the pages of these books. It was the smell, a smell that felt to me both utterly foreign and profoundly seductive. What I was smelling was India. It was the scent of a world at that time in my life that I desperately wanted to enter. And now, for the first time, I had done just that. To study Sanskrit in those days meant to rely heavily on 3 books. Whitney's closely lined grammar, with its green cover and its succession of fonts that grew ever smaller and ever more difficult to read as I dug deeper into the structural subtleties of the language. And then there was, of course, Monier Williams' massive Sanskrit-English dictionary, and finally, Landman's Reader. 3 mornings a week, Madhav and I sat across from each other, just the 2 of us, as I recall, on either side of his desk, making our way through a series of short tales from the Hitopadesha, each one featuring talking animals, and always at the end, a useful moral. This was the first time I had ever attended class in a professor's office. There was a kind of quiet intimacy in our sitting together like this, meticulously dissecting the text. But what most impressed itself on me was that this distinguished professor at the University of Michigan treated me with respect. He took my interest in Sanskrit seriously and let it be known that what we were doing together was worth his time. In those days, I was working as a bartender at the faculty club, which used to be located in the, I don't know where it is now, if it is, in the Union, which paid enough to survive but left not nearly enough for tuition. As it happened, I was barely able to complete the first year of graduate school before I ran out of money and had to withdraw from the university. It appeared to me at that time that I was finished with my formal studies, at least for the foreseeable future. When I told Madhav I could no longer afford to attend school, his response was, as I recall, immediate and unqualified. He would continue teaching me Sanskrit outside of the institution. This was the first time Madhav rescued me. As it turned out, and you will remember, I think, not only would he continue to teach me for free, of course, but since I was no longer a student at the university, we would no longer meet in the Frieze building. We shifted from his office to the basement of his home, which was actually not all that different from his office at the university. There was more space, but the space was still filled with shelves of old books from India. I had never seen so many books in a private home. I determined then that this was exactly the kind of home I wanted to live in someday, and now I do, and I don't know what to do with the books. One thing I remember in particular about this period was the long walk from my room near Burns Park across the Huron River Bridge to Madhav's house on the north side of the city. That winter, Ann Arbor got a lot of snow. And for me, having grown up in Michigan, snow and cold was just part of life. I liked the winter. I had no car, so I walked. It was no big deal. But Madhav, who had grown up in Pune and probably never seen snow for all I knew until moving to the U.S., seemed to consider the walk that I made every week virtually a superhuman feat. The other delightful memory I have about those meetings in Madhav's basement is of Shubhangi bringing us chai and snacks, which she made sure to do every time we were together. One day in the spring of that year, Madhav announced to me that he had found a potential source of money. He encouraged me to apply for an NDFL in Hindi, and with the support of his recommendation, I received a full scholarship that paid not only for my tuition, but also my living expenses. I quit my bartending job and re-enrolled in graduate school, and from that time on, I was able to devote my full attention to my studies. That was the second time Madhav rescued me. The next fall, with me officially enrolled at the university, we returned to Madhav's office in the Frieze building. This time there was a small group of students, myself, Laura Shakurjian, and Cindy Talbot, your old student, I believe. Together we read selections from the Rig Veda, from the Upanishads, the Sankhya Karika, Shankara's commentaries. One incident from this period that I specifically remember, and this reveals something deep about Madhav's character and interests. So, we were, I believe, reading an excerpt from a Buddhist Yogacara text. I may be wrong, but that's my memory. We had glossed the word chitta as consciousness, which is the same English word we had previously used to translate chetas and a number of other such technical terms. The burgeoning philosopher within me was growing increasingly troubled. Finally, I interrupted our reading. There are so many words like this, I objected. Chit, chitta, purusha, chetas, chaitanya, sambid, buddhi. What do they all mean? Madhav stared at me as if trying to figure out exactly what I was asking. Consciousness, he responded. All of them mean consciousness. But look, he went on, with new and obvious enthusiasm, tapping his finger on the page of the book we were reading. Look at this unusual form of the periphrastic participle. Now this is something you don't see every day. In 1976, I went to India on an AIS grant to study Hindi, and I didn't return to Ann Arbor until late summer of 1979. I finished my MA in linguistics and turned my attention to Buddhist studies. From then on, I spent a great deal more time on the third floor of the Frieze building, where the Department of Asian Languages and Cultures was housed, and I saw much less of my old Sanskrit guru. In 1985, I finished my PhD and left Ann Arbor for what I thought would be the last time. Madhav and I did not see each other again until the early 90s. In the interim, I had gone back to India for several years, then dropped out of academics altogether and moved into a trailer in the mountains of Oregon before drifting back to Ann Arbor, where Carl Port gave me a job at Shamandram bookstore, stamping prices and books. As it happened, Madhav stopped into the bookshop one afternoon, at least this is how I remember it, while I was working, and we struck up a conversation. He asked if I would like to teach first-year Sanskrit, and I accepted. Before long, he invited me to teach a class in Hinduism, which I also accepted. This was the third time Madhav rescued me, and this time was decisive. Were it not for the chance to teach that he offered me at that particular juncture in my life, I'm not at all sure that I would ever have chosen a career in academics. But at Madhav's prompting, I discovered I loved teaching, and that discovery changed everything. So that's my story. I'm aware that I've said nothing about Madhav Deshpande's astonishing erudition, his long, impressive list of publications, his worldwide reputation as one of the most accomplished living scholars of Sanskrit. And there are plenty of others, though, who have and can speak to that. My story is of another Madhav Deshpande, a man who generously helped out a young student more than once at a time when that young student needed help. And in doing so, he changed my life forever. I have not forgotten the kindness that Madhav showed me, or the example he provided of a caring, thoughtful mentor. These days, in my interactions with my own students, I try as much as I'm able to pass that kindness along. So thank you, Madhav. And may your retirement be one long, warm California summer's day.
Next test. For more than 4 decades, Madhav Deshpande has been, next to his teacher, George Cardona, the leading scholar of Sanskrit grammar in the United States. It has always been comforting to me, and in that peculiar ways academics can be comforted, to know that Madhav was available to answer any hard question about the interpretation of a Paninian rule I might have, and he answered unfailingly. Besides being a great Vaikadayana, Madhav has also made important contributions to sociolinguistics and Indian social and intellectual history. His sociolinguistic attitudes in India in 1979 was the first work of his I read, and it made a lasting impression. As an intellectual historian, Madhav has produced a wide range of enduring scholarship on Sanskrit ideology, for example, and the nature of shishta, that is, the character and implications of Sanskrit language competence. He was an early contributor to the collaborative research project on Indian knowledge systems on the eve of colonialism, and has written memorably on cognate issues such as the social history of pundits under the colonial regime and caste disputes in early modern Western India. All of Madhav's writings are marked by an uncommon set of virtues: thorough control of the data and the history of scholarship on the topic in question, coherence of argument, expository clarity and directness, and they demonstrate, as few others have succeeded in doing, a remarkable capacity to combine old Indian traditions of learning with new Western disciplines of knowledge. He's been generous to a fault to his own students and to those of his colleagues like me, and has brought succor to a whole generation of suffering elementary Sanskrit students with his fine introductory textbook. Not many may be aware that he's also been a pioneer in computer photography with his lovely Madhushri and Mandakini fonts. I wish Madhav all the best in his retirement. I convey my sympathies to the University of Michigan, which now must face the unenviable task of trying to replace him.
Sheldon?
Correct, Shelley Pollack, yeah. So second of Madhav's students has come to Ann Arbor today. This is one of the Dharma bums that Sandy Huntington lured to Ann Arbor. Many but not all of Madhav's students have his own modesty and self-effacing character, and the person I'm about to introduce has that quality. Because the answer to the often asked trivia question, who knows more about Burmese Buddhism than any white man in the world, is Patrick Pranke, who's come here today. Pat was a fellow student in the early days. Then he kind of went underground for a long time. He reappeared after I'd already arrived at Michigan, and it was my great pleasure to have him as a DSI and to work with Pat and on many projects. Those of you who keep the Princeton Dictionary of Buddhism on your bedside table should know that all of the entries on Pali and Burma were written by Pat. Once Pat got back, Luis and I had to devise a kind of upaya stratagem to get him to finish his PhD, which he did do. Of course, he'd started back in 70. Yeah, and so it completely blew our time to degree data for Rackham. But otherwise, we were very happy to have him finish. And we're very happy to have Pat come all the way from Louisville to speak to us today. So Patrick Pranke.
Thank you for that introduction. It's a really a great honor, Madhav, to come and celebrate your retirement. It's a sad day for Michigan, but we're all so very grateful. All of your students are so very grateful. I joined the Buddhist Studies program at Michigan under Luis and Madhav in 1981. And began studying Indo-Tibetan Buddhism, because in India I had begun studying Sanskrit there, and also Tibetan studies with the Geshe Wangchen, one of our common teachers. And but all along I had really been most interested in Theravada Buddhism. Right? So having gone through the master's program in Indo-Tibetan Buddhism, I said, well, now I'm going to do Pali. So then Madhav agreed to teach me Pali. I wasn't his best student. We had some very good students in class, but I plugged along. And then the question was, what kind of Theravada Buddhism do I want to study? Because these are kind of national traditions. Is it Sinhalese tradition, or Thai, or Cambodia was out because of Pol Pot. Burma was out because it's a closed country. But then at that time, Madhav shared with me this text that he had edited, the Milinda Pana Atthakatha, the commentary on the questions of Milinda. Now, a little bit about the text. The Milinda Pana is extra canonical for the Sinhalese tradition, but it's canonical for the Burmese. It's in their Khuddaka Nikaya. But nevertheless, it doesn't have a commentary attached to it because it joined the Pitakas after Buddhaghosa and the great commentators. So this is a text, a modern text, written in the first half of the 20th century by a Burmese scholar monk named U Narada. Zetawan Tatom Mingon Searo Zetawan Searo is his official title. U Narada is his name. And so Madhav told me a little bit about the story, because when he had taken his ship ride here, he had done an edition of that. And he also told me some things. He said, you know, this text is banned in Burma as heretical, and that's sort of how I acquired it. And I said, wow, that's so neat. Wow. Definitely, Burmese Buddhism was what I want to study, because, you know, it's got the oomph there, right? So that's really what got me interested in Burmese Buddhism. I started taking Burmese language with Siyasi in the summer. I would take in the summer, forget it during the year, take it again in the summer. And then by chance, I was allowed into Burma in the late 1980s. Burma had just opened up slightly to let a few scholars in, and I got in. Just by luck. Of course, 2 years later, through bad luck, I was thrown out of the country, but that kind of put a lid on that. But while I was there, I was so much interested in the Milinda Pana Atthakatha and its author, because although his book was banned as heretical, he's also considered to be an arhat. So how can that be? How can an arhat, by definition, an arhat is infallible. He can't make these kinds of mistakes. And yet the official tradition accepts him as an arhat. So I said, this is really what I want to study. So this is an artifact from Burma. This is a book of hagiographies published in about 1973 or so. And it is the Burmese name, I'm sure you're all interested, Yantane Pogotumya, which means arhats and extraordinary persons. And it's a book of hagiographies of living saints from the 20th century primarily, in which Taton Mingon Searo is prominently displayed. So I'd just like to share some things about that with it. So this is a modern literary work, so it's in modern style. It's kind of humorous. And Taton Mingon Searo, when I began reading with him, I began reading this literary Burmese. I was learning literary Burmese while I was reading his biography with a scholar monk who I didn't know at the time was an ecclesiastical judge and a main inquisitor for the then ongoing religious trials for heresy. And he was very happy to read this book with me. And he was kind of chuckling along because he knew this guy had an interesting story. So the story about U Narada I liked a lot because it reminded me of myself. U Narada was you know, a tremendous scholar monk, and I'm not like that, but he was very indecisive in his life. He would, as a novice, he entered the monastery and left, entered and left, and entered and left, and he was very slow in acquiring his knowledge, but he became a very, very good scholar. And then even as a monk, he would sometimes leave the monastery as a layman, and they describe, the story starts out very humorously. They talk about this guy who's sitting at this Burmese festival, sitting at a table giving out tickets, and he's awkward, and he's not wearing his clothes properly, and he's not addressing people properly in correct language. He's using monk speak all the time. And it turns out to be Taton Mingon Searo during one of his times when he had left the monastery. And he doesn't fit as a layman, but in the monastery he also doesn't fit. He's a very brilliant scholar, but he's a lousy teacher. He just his students don't respect him, he gets disappointed, he leaves the monastery, he comes back, and so on and so forth. So this is the kind of humorous introduction to this great saint. And then they go about his very productive scholastic tradition. They list the names of books that he writes. And then it comes up Linda Pana Atakata and the problem, right? So the question is, because this is a book of arhats, and he's already recognized an arhat, so they have to explain, how did this happen, you know? And they have, they go through the whole argument. One of the arguments, there are two problems with this text. One is on katina, and katina refers to the robes that you get at the end of the rains retreat and how they're dispersed. Right? So that's one of the problems. That's not the real problem. The real problem is about bhikkhuni sasana, which is the ordination of women. So Tato Mingan Sayadaw, looking over the scriptures and so on, and in this text, he says we should reinstate the bhikkhuni ordination. And so that was really, you know, beyond the pale. He published this book. It was published in 1941. And in 1948, it gets banned. Now, in 1948, it's not a coincidence why it would get banned in 1948. 1948 is the year that Burma became independent in January, and it was in that year that this book got banned, right? Because you have the institution of the Ministry of Religious Affairs, right, that then banned this book. They're cleaning up after all the mess that the British left behind and getting rid of heretics and things. And this is before he became a famous meditation teacher and an acclaimed arhat. He, by the way, is Mahasi Sayadaw's meditation master, right, on top of everything else. So how they explain this is, well, this is Mara's last temptation before he really becomes a saint, right? So this is like Jesus in the desert, right? So that's how they can say, yes, he was a heretic, but then he reformed and then became a great meditation master. And then at the end of each one of these hagiographies, it's a very interesting book, they'll have a short excerpt of the meditation practice that's prescribed by this great teacher. And just as a kind of final note, I was in Toronto a few months back, and they know that I study Burmese Buddhism and everything. And the Buddhist studies people there said, hey, you know, we're studying the Milinda Pana Atakata. So they're using that as a text now. And you'll be happy to know that one of those students brought back a new published edition of that text. The ban has been lifted. So thank you for revealing that to the West, and I'm sure they're very happy. You probably helped them lift the ban, and now this heretical text is easily available for everyone. Okay, so thank you very much. I thought you'd enjoy that.
So we also have some messages from students. I did not become a Sanskritist, but the model of inquiry Professor Deshpande lived and breathed was the best form of instruction a graduate student could have. When looking at language, he always asked why these sounds and that structure. When looking at systems and rules, he always investigated their origin, evolution, and implications. I believe that these are the first steps in any true critical inquiry. As Professor Deshpande's teaching and research assistant, I learned how to create instructional materials and build arguments. I recall Professor Deshpande saying that Shubhangi, his wife, put her foot down when it came to bringing books to the dinner table. That, books at the dinner table, is one habit I did not develop. I wish you all the best and will always be indebted to you for your wonderful guidance and inspiration. Ann Waymeyer. Okay, yeah, right, yeah. University of Florida. So we're now moving into the post-freeze building part of the program. Those who were not trained in the freeze building and probably don't remember that building that's been long demolished. So our next speaker is Hyung Ham, a student who finished just last year. The committee is entirely in the room, right? Madhav and Tom and Ben Brosi and myself. I had informed Hyung that we did not have funds to bring former students from abroad. And he wrote back to say that it was impossible that he not attend. And so he used his own frequent flyer miles to make a 20-hour flight from Seoul, Korea to Ann Arbor. He has a kind of dedication to his teacher that we find in Confucian societies that those of us who don't live in such societies can only crave. So, Hyung, thank you for making that long trip, and we look forward to your remarks.
Well, it's great honor for me to speak on this occasion and in front of all this audience, and it's my pleasure to share my memory, my story with Madhav with you. Let me. So I first encountered the name Madhav Deshpande in 2005 while I was serving the South Korean Air Force. My duty was air surveillance, and due to the nature of that job, I worked at night. And during the daytime, I studied Sanskrit. My Sanskrit textbook was Goldman's Devani Praveshka, not Madhav's famous Sanskrita Svodhini. But I was fascinated with the elaborate system of the language and the profound philosophical meaning that Indian intellectuals invested into it. So soon after the completion of the textbook, I needed some explanation on all those complicated traditional theories on the language itself, and I found Madhav's book, The Meaning of Nouns, Semantic Theory in Classical and Medieval India. The book was hard for me to fully understand at the time, but I was surprised to see that a man can freely navigate across the entire scholastic traditions of India. And more importantly, after having read Madhav's book, I looked up the state of Michigan on the map and came to know that there is a university called the University of Michigan. So now that I graduated from the University of Michigan under the guidance of Madhav Deshpande, the dream that I had dreamed of in the Army came true. I was a student of Madhav for about 6.5 years, from September 2009 to January 2016, and I like to recollect my memory with Madhav from the most recent one, that is my oral defense of my dissertation. So among many questions that I was asked at the defense, there was one question that I did not answer properly. That question was the last question of Professor Tom Trotman. As he concluded his comments, he wondered why I did not cite any of the committee members' work. I could not directly answer to the question, and as I revised the dissertation after the defense, I added 2 of Madhav's articles in my reference. However, even after the inclusion of Madhav's works, Professor Trotman's comment remained in my mind unresolved, and I felt uncomfortable with it whenever I replay my memory of the defense in my brain. It was not because I felt it obligatory to cite the committee members' work in my dissertation. It was rather because I was worried that others may perceive the absence of reference to my teacher's work as a negative sign. I was and I'm proud of having been a student of Madhav, but I worried that my dissertation may be seen uninfluenced by his scholarship. Now the dissertation has been submitted, and there is no way to alter a word in it. So I asked myself why I felt it natural to go without Madhav's work in the dissertation. And I answered, when I was writing it, I was trying to read Sanskrit text through Madhav's eyes, that is, to read all the information that Madhav would detect in the wordings of a given text. I was trying to emulate Madhav's mastery of and Madhav's sensitivity to Sanskrit. In his Sanskrit classes, Madhav usually translated a sentence more than once. He first explained the karma of every word to unfold and demonstrate the whole range of meaning that a word can have. Then he formulated several different translations of one sentence. This practice of reading double or triple meanings from a sentence seemed very peculiar to me at first. Well, leaving the meaning of text unfixed without determining one correct translation made me feel uneasy. Only after several semesters of training did I realize all those alternative readings that Madhav presented were intended by the ancient authors or possible to traditional readers. As our reading sessions continued over a couple of years, I came to look up to Madhav with awe and reverence, because such an ability cannot but be originated from the same level of education of ancient and medieval India. And the state of being equipped with classical education, which does not exist anymore, seemed ideal for a modern scholar, but impossible at best to me. But I had such a man in front of me as my advisor. In my dissertation, I adopted the Madhav style of reading text, even when it is not written in Sanskrit. I tried to be careful to read the conditions and effects of a word for being there. I tried to read the rationale behind the selection of a specific word by considering what is being included and excluded in using that word. I tried to learn the karma of a given word and to observe how authors approach various aspects of a word. In short, I tried to be Madhav. To me, Madhav was present everywhere in my dissertation. However, it was not the only contribution of Madhav to my dissertation. The more important factor in its completion was his care. I still do not know whether it is true or false when Professor Lopez told me that Madhav deferred his retirement only to see my graduation. I was told that it was my dissertation that was preventing him from proceeding to the third stage of life, which is retiring into forest. I felt a little bit guilty for not being able to finish writing the dissertation in time, but I didn't think that those words were 100% true. Nevertheless, I knew Madhav cares for me. I cannot forget the apprehensive gaze that Madhav showed to me when I told him I will have the second daughter in 3 months at the end of my 5th year. I needed much courage to tell him about it, since I knew that he was concerned about whether I could graduate or not. And I was fortunate that I could study under such a teacher who cares for students with loving and kindness. Madhav called me for an interview when I applied for the graduate program at the U of M. I was studying at UC Berkeley at that time as a visiting graduate student. It was January 11th, which is my birthday, and I thought that having a phone call from a professor whom I admire is an auspicious sign. I was so excited that I emailed Madhav to let him know that I appreciate his phone call and it was my birthday. In a few hours, Madhav emailed me back saying, "Happy birthday." That one line was so sweet, and in retrospect, it was telling much about Madhav. With that one line, the trust in Madhav as a teacher, not just as a scholar, was set in my mind from that moment. However, there is one regrettable thing in my education. In the statement of purpose that I submitted when I entered here, I wrote that I wanted to learn Vyakarana, the tradition of Sanskrit grammarians, in which Madhav is most specialized. I do not know whether my memory is correct or not, but as far as I can remember, in the very first class with Madhav, I expressed my intention to learn Panini. Then Madhav told me that if I insist on learning that seriously, it is not possible for me to graduate in 10 years. I think Madhav was correct on that. And I'm glad that I found another field of study that is as much interesting as Balinese grammar, but requires me less time. But I'm still interested in Sanskrit grammarian's tradition, and as a student of Madhav Deshpande, I feel obliged to know well about it. After graduation, I started reading Bhartrhari, the 5th century grammarian, and wrote one article about the 3 dimensions implicated in his notion of speech. Though I'm working physically away from Madhav now, but I'm slowly making Madhav's specialization as my second major. I wish I can show my work to Madhav someday soon, and in the future work, I will not be able to avoid citing a bunch of Madhav's papers. Whenever I introduce myself to others as a graduate of U of M and as a student of Madhav Deshpande, people expect a high level of academic quality. I try to meet their expectation, and I think that is the only manner of repaying scholarly debt that I owe to Madhav. I'll try my best to produce academic works of the high standard that he taught me how to appreciate. So, no more worries about me, Madhav. You are now free from that job. And I congratulate you on successfully finishing the household stage of life. And I want to let you know that I deeply thank you for everything you have shown to me in an hour. Thank you.
I will say that when Hyung arrived, he said that he wanted to study at Michigan for at least 10 years before he got his PhD. And so I did make up that lie about he needed to finish up before so the Madhav could retire. But Hyung has just won a very prestigious fellowship, which will allow him to spend 2 years on a postdoc in Japan. I think Madhav's been blessed, I think, in the last part of his career with 2 of his best students, I think, both in Hyung and in the student I will introduce in a moment. But before I do that, one more letter. From 1988 to 1997, I was a graduate student in the PhD program in Buddhist Studies, where my main Sanskrit teachers were Luis Gomez and Madhav Deshpande. Despite their Herculean efforts, I'm afraid I never became a truly skilled Sanskritist, and I struggle mightily with the language today. Nevertheless, whenever I stub my toe on the Monier-Williams dictionary, which is now sitting dust-covered in a corner of my office loft, having long been abandoned in favor of the digital version, I still look back fondly on the many torturous hours I spent in their classrooms, trying in vain to decipher some unintelligible compound. What I remember most about Madhav was his super chill and his easygoing vibe, as if nothing in the intense academic world surrounding him could ever ruin his mellow mood. That's the kind of academic I want to be, I thought to myself on more than one occasion. Alas, I've turned out to be much more high-strung and stressed out than the fine example he set before me, but I do still aspire to attain his level of Zen-like equanimity one day. Madhav, on the occasion of your retirement, I offer you my enormous gratitude for your valiant efforts to teach me Sanskrit, and very best wishes for a long, healthy, and happy life for many years to come.
Jonathan?
No. You already guessed before.
Oh, Onoma?
Yeah. Reiko Onoma, Dartmouth College. Yeah, right. Yeah, okay. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. So having passed through the retired colleagues and the former students, we're going to end now before we get to the man himself with the current student, Anna Johnson, who's here. Anna has just also won a very prestigious fellowship for dissertation research, and she will represent the current graduate student. So Anna, welcome. Yeah.
So when I saw the list of people presenting today, I thought, great, I'm going to be the only female speaking and the only one who cries. So thank you very much. And it will be the fault of my elders in the Dharma if I do lose it, which I'm going to. So I'm very honored to be among the speakers today as one of the newer and therefore very sadly one of the last of Professor Deshpande's Sanskrit students at the University of Michigan. I hold in my hands here my most prized possession, which is one of a set of volumes I recently inherited when Professor Deshpande invited his students into his office to select which treasures off of his bookshelves we would like to keep for ourselves. And I chose this set of the entire Pali Canon in Devanagari, which is about 2.5 shelves worth of books. I'm also doomed to live in a house of bloated bookshelves. But on the first page of each of the volumes, it says, M.M. Deshpande, 23rd of July, 1973, Ann Arbor. So I was -9 years old when he wrote that. But I take it and cherish it as a personal dedication to myself. So 5 years ago, I returned from India, another Dharma bum, prepared to start graduate school here in order to study Indian and Tibetan Buddhism with Professor Deshpande and my advisor, Professor Lopez. I was told by our office to compose a syllabus for my independent study in Sanskrit. And as a young scholar, a bit big for my britches, who regularly bit off more than I could chew, I devised a syllabus which stipulated that I read upwards of 50 pages of Sanskrit a week. I don't know when I thought I was going to sleep or eat or do any of my other work, but that really didn't matter to me at the time. I could sleep when I was dead, but now was the time for Sanskrit. So I sent in the syllabus to the department and received an email back from our director of graduate studies that actually said, this is not enough. We expect much more than this from our advanced language students. And I thought, oh my God, these guys are really intense. You know, these are hardcore, these are serious guys. So it was recommended to me that in addition to the hundreds of pages of Sanskrit I would be reading, I would also have to write a final paper at the end of the term. And I agreed, fully ready to plow ahead. So fortunately for my sanity and for my education, this was not the case. It became clear to me on the first day of class with Professor Deshpande that he was serious, but not in the way that I or the department office realized. We did not plow through pages of Sanskrit. We lingered for a long time on lines and on words, talked about the meaning, the implications, and consulted other sources. And like Dr. Hum said earlier, created multiple translations for everything. So it was intense and immersive, not like the frantic sprint that I expected, but more like the slow burn of a bodybuilder. So we didn't get through 50 pages a week. We would get through maybe one. But that one page would be raked through inside and out. And the one page would be a door to an entire world of meaning. And it was there that I learned what close reading really meant, and I was glad to be humbled by it. I did, though, end up writing term papers at the end of every semester of Sanskrit, which seemed like a strange request at first, but ended up being a true necessity for my ability to digest the material, to enter into the thought world of these texts that we were reading, and that I would only have had access to through the vast knowledge and the meticulous attention of Professor Deshpande. We read texts on Abhidharma, on Yogacara and Vinaya, which are not his specialty, but which he seemed to know very deeply. We read Vasubandhu's Abhidharma Kosha on the 11th type of form, the Avijñapti Rupa, which will continue to haunt my dreams forever. We also read excerpts of the Pravajyavastu, the section on ordination of the Vinaya Pitaka, the Buddhist monastic code, comparing it linguistically to the Pali and culturally to Brahmin ritual initiations. The term papers allowed me to put these enormous concepts into my own words, to start small and learn how to relate to the texts at my own level. I thought of the phrase, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. But I didn't want to say that in front of Professor Troutman. So the image of Professor Deshpande that will never leave my mind and that seems the most indicative of the breadth and depth of his wisdom is of him sitting across the table from me in his office, looking at our text, deep in thought, very quiet for a long moment. So I wasn't sure if it was my turn to speak or if I should wait. But then he would go to his bookshelves and take one volume off the shelf, open it up to the exact page, somehow, that he wanted to talk about. He would turn the book upside down towards me and read upside down so that I could read right side up. And I think that's a perfect image of the enormity of skill and the generosity of a true teacher. So I want to end with a quote from my own advisor, Professor Lopez, also following Dr. Hum's advice to quote your committee members. So Professor Lopez often gives his students a thought experiment to imagine the Buddha with a shaved head. It's impossible. You can't do it. You can't imagine the Buddha with a completely shaved head, because then he's just a simple monk. He doesn't have the ushnisha, the crown protuberance, or the princely top knot. However, I have a new thought experiment for you. Try to imagine the Buddha in an office overflowing with bookshelves, with overflowing bookshelves, wearing a tweed jacket and a herringbone duckbill cap, with a constant gentle smile. Sorry. And inexhaustible generosity.
One more letter. So after we adjourned for our reception, this will be on a table, and I want to invite everyone to add some comments. This last one is also from a former student, and it got me choked up a bit myself there, sorry. I first arrived in Ann Arbor in 1983, having already begun the study of Sanskrit in Japan several years before. I think that at that time, as perhaps later, many of Professor Deshpande's students were interested in Sanskrit because they wanted to read Buddhist literature, although some were certainly, as he himself at least primarily, also were interested in linguistics. For whatever reason, but certainly not because of any superb command of the materials, I was early on drafted to teach the sections of Sanskrit using at the time the materials which would later become his famous textbook. It must have been just around that time that Madhav discovered the software ChiWriter. Is that right? ChiWriter, sorry. Made in the first place for typesetting mathematical equations. He then, in very short order, designed not only a very useful Romanized font with all necessary diacritical marks, but also a Devanagari font, which, to my mind, is still unequaled, having been based on his very own superb handwriting and the Nirnaya Sagar font. It is a pity that this lovely font has now disappeared in this Unicode era. As a student, in addition to learning a certain amount of Sanskrit, I was also very happy to listen to Madhav's stories. He talked of how he began to study Sanskrit at age 5, of how his teachers would assign homework and make it clear that were it not completed, there was no need to return to class. A real trial by fire. I remember vividly his anecdote about the games he and his classmates would play as they studied Paninian grammar. They were to prove that Marathi sentences were, through the fine use of grammatical rules, actually well-formed Sanskrit utterances. Madhav faced a problem when he decided to come to study for his PhD in the US. His Sanskrit was, of course, so much better than that of the other students, and Professor Ludo Rocher, used his Sanskrit, of course, letter of application, as reading material in his class. In the end, before switching to the guidance of Professor Cardona and concentrating on linguistics and grammar, Madhav read something that he had so far not encountered mathematical texts. It is as much a tribute to his teacher, Roker, as to him, that Professor Roker was able to offer guidance in such an arcane topic, but I do not remember Madhav ever indicating regret that he did not pursue further studies of this literature. Although, as far as I recall, he's never published in this field, I know that poetry is close to Madhav's heart. I remember his account of the Maharashtra state Sanskrit exams and his story that to have any chance of winning, one had not merely to know the right answer to the questions that were set, but to answer in verse, and ultimately in abstruse and rare meters. Perhaps this training is what prepared him to while away his time in a shopping mall, while his wife Shubhangi was busy in stores writing Sanskrit poetry. In this regard, when I once dared to study the work of a Sanskrit poet myself, editing a small section of a work by Kshemendra, I knew I was in deep waters when I took some questions to Professor Deshpande. Usually he was, even if interested in Buddhist materials, he was not very impressed by their language. That is, the middle indic of Buddhist works certainly interested him, but he found some hybrid text challenging in the sense of trying to understand, especially the socio-linguistic milieu. But the Sanskrit of the Buddhist authors, I had the impression, left him somewhat less than enthused. Therefore, when he reacted to a passage of Kshemendra with appreciation, I knew I was trying to read something truly difficult. Therefore, his help was crucial to me. Many years later, before daring to publish my edition, I asked the opinion of the late Professor Michael Hahn, a well-known specialist in Sanskrit poetry and especially Buddhist poetry. Hahn praised my effort, saying particularly how nicely I'd recognized a shlesha, or punning reference in a poem. No, I had to quickly correct him. I did not recognize it. Madhav pointed it out to me so long before. For a number of years, Madhav has spoken of moving to California to be near his daughters and grandchildren. I know that this will not at all lessen his engagement with Sanskrit, and the only thing I'm wondering about is how in heaven's name are you going to move all those books? Jonathan Silk, Leiden University. So after having heard from so many colleagues and friends and students, it's now time to hear from the man himself.
I was just telling my second year students that my original plan was that I would speak in Sanskrit and have them translate. And that would be their final exam. But, so I don't know what to say. So many people have said so much about me. I don't know whether it's all me or me as seen by some of you guys. But I want to tell you some more stories that haven't been told before. So the love of Sanskrit in my family goes back at least for 6 generations. The first guy that we have remembered within the family, he lived from 1852 to 1903. His name was Sridhar Jinsiwale, and he was one of the first graduates of the Deccan College in Pune in 1870 in Sanskrit, when Keelhorn and these guys were, some of them were his teacher. Bhandarkar was his teacher. And then he became a teaching fellow at the Deccan College and eventually became a professor of Sanskrit in Mumbai. He collected 3,000 books in those days. And when he passed away, since he had no children, all of those 3,000 books and his whatever estate came to his sister, who was my grandfather's grandmother. And so for 2 generations, the books came within the family, and at some point they were given to a public library in Pune. But a small portion of those books was still kept, which I have now inherited, and I have still in my basement there. So as I was growing, I heard so many stories of this Professor Jinsiwale. My father had heard stories of Jinsiwale. And so Sanskrit is the thing to do. And so my father graduated, did his bachelor's in Sanskrit. He became a librarian, but he collected an enormous collection of Sanskrit books. I mean, he was both a librarian and a Sanskritist. All his friends were Sanskritists, college classmates, including S.D. Joshi, who became one of my professors. So in our house, you know, every day somebody was dropping by and saying, well, who did this? They were all Sanskritists. So as I was growing up, around my age of 10 or 11, I was getting into too many fights with the neighborhood kids. And so my parents would get complaints every day, and it says, well, you got to do something, lock him up. So my father thought that maybe if he can go to some place and stay there and sit in the library, but go, be away from this neighborhood, that might be good. So he took me at the age of 10, this was 5th grade, to this Tilak Maharashtra Vidyapith, which is a traditional Sanskrit school. And I said, well, it's just a nice place, you can go and study there. And the admission was 1 rupee, and you can study for as many years. No fee. So I started going there, and so one of the teachers there, Bhagavad Shastri, he was my first year, and this was my 5th grade, first year's teacher. And he continued to teach me until I finished my master's degree. So young, 12 years, somehow, I was able to do under Bhagavad Shastri in Pune. So 5th grade, I started studying Sanskrit at this place. In my high school, Sanskrit started during the 7th or 8th grade. So I had already done 3-4 years of Sanskrit before Sanskrit began in my high school. And at the final year of my high school, this high school teacher, Pandit Bhide, his high school class was like any other high school class. You study or don't, if you pass, fine. If you don't, what can you do? But he was training his students to win this Jagannath Shankar Sheth Sanskrit Scholarship. For 10 consecutive years, his students won that. Ashok Akluskar was the first one who retired from UBC. So I said, well, why not go? So he had this special class on weekends, but the rules were very different. The rules was that you make one mistake and you go home and never come back. So on the first weekend, there were about 12 students who volunteered to join this thing. By the end of the month, there were 2 left. And somehow I, with one more student, we lasted through the whole year. And I got that scholarship. But I had 6 other subjects, algebra and chemistry and physics and, So I spent 90% of my time and energy on this one subject and 10% of the energy on 6 other subjects. And Shubhangi, my wife, she was first in all subjects. In cumulative, all subjects, just 1 year later. So I don't know how she studied, she might tell you. But I spent 90% of my energy on one subject. And, so that kind of direction of which subject I was going to go into was kind of set. Then I joined Ferguson College, and I continued going to this Tilak Vidyapith simultaneously. So by this time, I was like one student for Bhagavad Shastri. And he said, well, I don't have time during the day. So when can I learn from you? He says, well, how about 8 to 9 in the evening? Then there was another teacher who used to teach Nyaya, which is logic in Sanskrit. His livelihood was teaching music. And his music students started coming from 6 in the morning. And he said, I cannot teach you after 6 in the morning. So 5 to 6, study with him, 8 to 9 with Bhagavad Shastri. When I'm going to go home? So Bhagavad Shastri said, well, why don't you sleep in the library? So for almost like for 4 years, I would do this 8 to 9 class, sleep in the library. I had this rollaway bed stashed in a cabinet, and the library was closed, and so I would get the key, go there, sleep there. 5 o'clock, the phone would ring. I said, are you awake? And after that 5 to 6 class, then I would go home, take a bath, eat my breakfast, then go to Ferguson College, sleep during those classes. Because I was so the college continued that way, and in college we had a lot of fun with Sanskrit. Sanskrit was not a dead language, and this is one thing I fight with Sheldon all the time. He wrote this article on sort of the death of Sanskrit. I mean, for me, Sanskrit is a very much living language. I can write poetry in Sanskrit more fluently than in Marathi, which is my mother tongue. So Sanskrit, we were doing Sanskrit plays on stage, writing plays, not only staging old plays, but then writing new plays and putting them on stage. And so we had just a lot of fun during these Ferguson College days. When I went to the University of Pune to do my master's degree, Professor S.G. Joshi, who was my father's buddy, he was my main teacher. Again, what Bhagavad Shastri did for me, S.G. Joshi did during those 2 years. We had only 2 hours during the week in the schedule of the university. S.G. Joshi said, you can't study this thing this way. Sanskrit grammar, you can't learn in 2 hours a week. So we were 3 students. He said, you have to come to my home every single day. No Saturday, no Sunday break, every day. So every single day for those 2 years, we were going to S.G. Joshi's home. And he would explain, things in such minute details that, now we know that it's not possible to do this in 2 hours a week. S.G. Joshi had done his PhD at Harvard. And so when he came back to India, he wanted his students to be trained in US. Of course, he wanted them to come back, and I'll tell you the story a little. So he was pushing me to apply to, so I applied to a couple of different universities, and Pennsylvania gave me a 4-year scholarship. The concern of Ludo Roche, who was the chair at that point, was that, we don't have money to pay for your travel. So you have to guarantee, somebody in Pune has to guarantee that you will travel. So S.G. Joshi sent him a telegram. In those days, there was no, phone was not so easy. So we were communicating by telegrams. So S.G. Joshi just sent a telegram. So we will take care of his travel. The airfare, one-way airfare was 5,000 rupees. Now 5,000 rupees in those days was such an enormous amount. It was twice the annual salary of my dad. Even S.G. Joshi had, his salary was probably 500 rupees a month. So 5,000 rupees, how to raise that money was a big problem. So I'm applying furiously here, there. The banks wanted, some kind of security for if they were to give me a loan. So 2 professors of mine and Professor Bapat, who was they signed for bank, security for bank. And then I came to know that there is another alternative, that there are these shipping companies that are willing to allow you to travel for free as a form of scholarship. So this place in Pune called India Foundation finally gave me this free passage on a cargo ship a month, 600 rupees for food cost. So I said, wow, that's wonderful. I have time on my hand. So my father and one of his friends, we were to leave from Pune on a train to Bangalore, change trains to go to Cochin in Kerala, and then catch my ship. So he's going on a ship, why take bags, huge trunks. So there are 2 big trunks and a briefcase. So then there was another girl from Pune in Boston. Her parents gave 2 more trunks. So we had, 4 trunks with me, loaded on the train from Pune to Bangalore. In Bangalore, the trains go on strike. So how to go from Bangalore to Cochin? So we had to take the state transport buses, from one into Tamil Nadu, from Tamil Nadu to Kerala. The language became an immediate problem because all the signs on the buses were all in Kannada, then in Tamil, then in Malayalam. So I asked somebody, how do I say I don't speak Kannada? He says, Kannada baradille. So we went to Tamil Nadu. Somebody's trying to talk to me in Tamil. So Tamil baradille. Malayalam baradille. So we finally reached Cochin. We go to the office of this shipping company. The ship is delayed by 10 days. Well, what to do now? So as luck would have it, the chief of the Cochin harbor was a Marathi guy. And he said, no, just stay with me. Stay in my house. So my father went back to Pune. I stayed with him for 10 days. His daughter also lived in New York. So she had 2 more trunks. So by the time they loaded me onto the ship, there were 2 more students with me, 3 students. The rest of it was all crew. 6 trunks. And then the ship started, and the ship had to go all around South Africa because the Suez Canal was closed. And I got so sick, I got seasick. And I said, I'm going to die. I told the captain because our cabin was just next to captain's cabin. And so I told the captain, I'm going to die. Just drop me off in South Africa. He said, I'm not going to do any such thing. You will be fine. Just, the sea is rough. After a few days, you'll be okay. And so I was okay. So the ship reached New York Harbor. So somebody was going to come to pick me up. So from Pune, somebody had written a letter. My uncle is there and he'll come pick you up. So 6 trunks were offloaded onto the docks. And then this fellow came. He was 80 years old by this time. So he couldn't drive. So he had somebody else drive him. When they saw these 6 trunks, they said, no, we cannot fit any of this in my car. So there was something called Railway Express shipping. So all the trunks were handed over to them. Says, give them your address in Philadelphia. My only address was this generic address, University of Pennsylvania. So that's what I gave them. I was left with a briefcase, 1 change of clothes, my admissions letter, and $50 in my pocket. So I go to the home of this family. They put me on a train to Philadelphia. Next day, the train reaches Philadelphia, and I walk from 30th Street train station to my department. So everybody said, wow, you finally reached. We were so worried. So my first question is, when do I get my first month's fellowship? Because I was under the impression that as soon as I reach, I will get my first month's. Don't worry, you will get it by the end of the month. So, I have $50 in my pocket. How am I going to make through the month? So again, luckily, a friend from Pune, his brother used to live in Philadelphia. So he had given me his phone number. So from this Department of Oriental Studies, I called this. He happened to be home. He says, well, take a cab and come to my apartment. So out of the $50 I had, I don't know, half of it, I had to pay the cab. And I reached his apartment. And you won't believe, there were 6 students from Ferguson College who were living in that one building. They were doing degrees in different whatever. So I didn't know any of them, except this one guy, who, even him I didn't know, but his brother in Pune was my classmate. They collectively adopted me. And he says, don't worry about anything, we will take care of you. The trunks that were shipped to Philadelphia got lost for 6 months because they didn't have a sufficient address. So I had to buy absolutely everything. And these guys were willing to sort of give me, loan me enough money to make through the month so that by the end of the month I will get my... So I meet my new teachers, Professor Cardona and Professor Roche. So just want to tell you one snippet story of seeing Professor Cardona. So first I called him and said, well, your apartment is close to my home, just come to my home. So I go there. So he was sitting with one of his other students and going through his pages of his dissertation. And it was just scratched with a red pen, all through. And then at some point he just threw those, he says, I can't even deal with it. Just go. This is so wrong, And I'm just sitting there watching this thing. Just, oh my God, And he's going to be my advisor. But somehow, Cardona and I got along just fine because he could speak in Sanskrit. His Sanskrit was so good that he was not only reading Sanskrit grammar, but he, like a Pandit from Banaras, it was easier for him to explain things in Sanskrit sometimes. So he would just read a line from some commentary on Mahabhashya and explain in Sanskrit. And so we got along really, really fine. And at the end of the day, finally I finished. 2 years go by, I finished my coursework, and a friend of mine got married. So I said, well, this guy gets married, what about me? Someday I got to get married. So I started thinking, well, I got to find a girl. So what to do now? So I said, well, let me think. So there were girls that I knew in Pune. So let me write a letter and see what happens. So just the first letter I wrote to Shubhangi. She was my classmate in Ferguson College. And she used to sing beautifully, and she also knew some Sanskrit. Her major subject was mathematics. But she used to take part as a musician in our Sanskrit dramas. So I wrote this letter. The letter simply said, I still remember your beautiful singing. It would be so nice, if you could send me a recording in your voice of Meghaduta. So Meghaduta is this romantic poem called Cloud Messenger by famous Sanskrit poet Kalidas. Lo and behold, the letter reaches there and says, why is this guy writing this? Her father picked up the letter and walked to my parents. Why did your son write this letter to my daughter? So before I hear anything from Shubhangi, I get a letter from my father. So, why did you write this letter? Now they want you to marry their daughter. I said, that's fine with me. That's what I was going to ask. So she came to Philadelphia, and I finished my PhD. Around that time, I was furiously getting letters from Pune, from my professors in Pune. So don't stay there. We sent you to get trained, but come back, and we have a job for you. So I believed that, and within a week after I finished my dissertation defense, this was May of '72, Shubhangi and I returned to Pune. So the first day I reached there, I went to the University of Pune, and my professor said, wow, I'm so happy you finally came back. There is going to be a job, but it will probably take a month to, get the whole clearance and advertisement and whatnot. So just, relax. So I had never met Shubhangi's parents by then. So I went to see them. Within the very first week, the Chancellor of Pune University was fired for financial mismanagement. The new guy who is appointed put a total freeze on hiring. So the job, which was never even disappeared before it even materialized. So then I started teaching at a local college on 15th of June. That was a 1 year, somebody had gone on leave. And 15th of June, I started teaching Sanskrit. End of June, I get a telegram from Michigan. A classmate of mine from Philadelphia, Peter Hook, had gotten a job here in linguistics. And so Peter Hook's telegram said, go to this address in Pune and wait for my phone call. That was all it said. So I had no idea, why, what's so urgent. So, and again, as luck would have it, my roommate from Philadelphia had come to Michigan, and it was his home in Pune, his parents' home. So I'm go there waiting for his phone call. Finally, the phone call comes. Peter says, we have a job. We have a job for you. And here is my chairman. So this was Professor Gedney, who was the chairman of linguistics at that time. And Gedney said that their Sanskrit professor had just left for Berkeley, and they were in urgent need for somebody. In the meantime, they had called Cardona, gotten a copy of my dissertation, gotten letters from Roche and Cardona, and here is a job offer on phone. Says, will you come back? I had not talked to Shivangi, I hadn't talked to my parents. Says, how much time do you have? How about 48 hours? So I sent a telegram back in 48 hours. I'm coming. The stuff that we had shipped, 7 boxes shipped from Philadelphia to Pune, had not even reached. So we returned to Michigan. So 1 year goes by. I had a 1 year visitor appointment, and it seemed like for a while that there wouldn't be any continuing position. So Gedney had told me that they would pay for my travel back, and so we were kind of reconciled. After April, the term ends, we are going back. In March, Gedney walked into my classroom. I said, can you come out? He says, a job opened up an hour ago. And I'm coming from a committee meeting. They want to know if you want to stay. So I want to know right now. Do you want to stay or go? So I said, I'm staying here. So by the end of the day, I had a letter of tenure track appointment. And another faculty member left town the same day. And for a few weeks, I had to pick up some of his teaching. Something like that happened. And so I'm here. Came with a windfall, and I have now all these students that I'm so proud of. My second year Sanskrit class is here. I was going to ask them to translate my Sanskrit speech, but they are here. Just want to tell you 2 anecdotes of my students' reactions. So this was probably the class when Sandy was a student. So some student came to me and said, you're such a wonderful teacher. I said, okay, well, thank you so much. He says, when you speak, you know what I see? I said, what do you see? He said, like a color stream from your mouth. They're so wonderful. So in those days, students used to smoke things, And then on the other side, there was another guy. This was some student, and I have the letter somewhere in my files. She wrote, I cannot sleep for 3 nights before your class, and I cannot sleep for 3 nights after your class. I'm so terrified that you will ask me to speak out a Sanskrit sentence. It's a dead language anyway. Why do you, why do you care? But I'm so happy with you guys that we have been doing Sanskrit in class, and you're not scared, and you're just doing fine. So, whatever Sheldon Pollock says, my students, I believe, have kept Sanskrit still alive, and they will keep it alive for quite a long time to come. So, I just want to thank all my students, all the colleagues, all the family friends who have come. So many of them we know for last 45 years. And they have shared our joys and emergencies. When we call 911, they are already there before our ambulance reaches there. So it's going to be tough to move from Ann Arbor. But Ann Arbor will always be in our heart. So thank you so much. Thank you. Shubhangi would like to say a few words. Okay. I think, how about you need a chair, I think. Are you okay?
Yeah, this way it's fine. Yeah. Hi, everybody. So I'm just here to tell a missing story in Madhav's speech. So we got married in Philadelphia, and in 1972, we went to India, and I wanted to do music as my career. So I wanted to stay in India. So Madhav comes home, I got this job. Peter Hook has called, and I knew Peter also. I knew the two people that were here in Ann Arbor. But I said, I can't go back. I don't want to go back. I want to be here. So Madhav tried all kinds of things. One day he said he bought like 3 saris. The next day he said, we will get some jewelry for you. That didn't do it. So one day, third day, he said, I'm going to learn playing tabla. And we had very few days left. But he did learn tabla for 2 weeks. And I don't know any other tabla player who has learned for 2 weeks and actually played in a concert. So after he said he will learn tabla playing, I said, okay, we'll go. Okay, and it was 1 year anyway, so I would be back in 1 year. So we came to Ann Arbor, and Peter Hook and the other guy was Vijay Surpuria, who was Madhav's friend or roommate even in Philadelphia. So they took us in like a family kind of, and I was kind of satisfied kind of. Then what happened was we met this girl whose name was Sanhita Kaur. She was a good musician. She had a master's degree in music. And so we both started singing, and Madhav started playing tabla with us. And I don't think anybody has gotten that much practice, because every day we would sing, and he would have to play tabla with us. So he got good at it after some practice. That time, South Asia Center was in Lane Hall, and Tom Troutman was the chairman of the South Asia Center. So, and Lane Hall had like a big hall, big lounge, and in between there was like a little stage. and it had very nice decorative stuff around it. So I said, why don't we use this stage? So I don't know whether I asked Tom or whether we asked Judy Baker or, oh, thank you. So whether we asked Judy Baker, Pete Baker, but somebody gave us permission to use that stage. So Samhita and I used to sing almost every week a concert in Lane Hall. And Madhav used to play tabla with us. After that, we got twin daughters, Madhu and Manju, in the month of May. After that, we were very busy. And Samhita also got married and she left for Houston. So that part stopped. But meanwhile, we met a lot of Marathi people in Ann Arbor. And at that time, most people of our age were having their first children. So like, there are some of them are here, like Rekha calls me and she says, I see the name Deshpande. So can you visit? And so we just came to know a lot of people. We also came to know people from Farmington, and like we got into the music circle of Marathi community in the Detroit area. And then we started enjoying staying here. And of course, going back after that was sort of cancelled out. we will go back just for visit, but not for good. So basically, we have enjoyed staying here, and we will miss everybody who is here. But this experience has given us some enthusiasm and encouragement to go to a new place. and this place was very unknown. Compared to that, California, we are going closer to our children. So it's not that unknown. So just to end with a quote from a poem, a Marathi poem. Lee probably will understand what I'm saying, or my other Marathi friends will. The words are, जिकडे जावे तिकडे माझी भावंडे आहेत, सर्वत्र खुणा माझ्या घरच्या मजला दिसत आहेत. This is by Keshav Sut, a great poet in Marathi. So the meaning is, wherever I go, I see my brothers and sisters. And everywhere I see the signs of my home. So taking that in mind, we are planning to go. And we, of course, will remember everybody here. And thanks a lot for everything. And as I was joking, is like, oh, we are moving there doesn't mean we are not coming back, right? We will visit many times. So see you sometime next year. Bye-bye.
So that completes our program, and please join us at the reception just straight down the halls. It's exactly the same room on the other side of Rackham. Thank you very much to everyone.